For any real number k, if you have x squared equals k, then we can say that x is equal to the square root of k, or that x is equal to negative square root of k. You don't have to write a plus and then a minus. We have a shorthand notation called plus or minus, so you can say that x is equal to plus or minus square root of k. What this last part is saying here is if you take the square root of something, you must have the positive and the negative version, so you need to put a plus or minus at the very least, or separate them into two. This way is typically the easiest. So we have our first one, x squared equals 25. And so we want to get rid of the square, and to undo a square, we take a square root. But what you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other, so we have to square root the second side. Square root and the square are going to cancel, leaving you with just an x. But remember what I said earlier. When you take a square root, which is what we did, you're going to have a plus or a minus in there. So plus or minus, and then you take the square root of whatever you have, in this case 25, which will just give us a positive 5. And this is our solution, a plus 5 and a negative 5. You can also write it like this, but that is up to you. Again, plus or minus takes care of writing it twice. Here we have 2x squared minus 10 equals 0. So we're going to solve for x, and we do that by adding the 10 over, like so. And then we got to get to x alone, so we're going to take the 2 and divide it over. So we're going to have x squared equals 5. Now we have to get rid of a square, so to do that we square root. And again, what you do to one side, you must do to the other. So on the left side, the square root and the square will cancel, leaving you with just an x. And over here, because we took a square root, we must have plus or minus. And then the square root of 5 is just square root of 5. It cannot simplify. So we just leave it as such. And that is our solution to this equation. Next we have the quantity t minus 4 all squared equals 12. So t minus 4 all squared equals 12. And since we have the square on its own side by itself with no other terms around, we can immediately try and get rid of the square by square rooting. And again, what we do to one, we do to the other. So the square root and the square knock each other out, leaving with t minus 4. And because we took a square root, we have to use plus or minus. It must be there. And then we reduce square root of 12, which we can say, if you've forgotten, is just 4 times 3, which is square root of 4 times square root of 3, which is just 2 square root of 3. So 2 root 3. Now I can get t by itself, add 4 over, and it's going to look a little weird, but that's okay. We can't add 4 to this, so we're just going to put it in front. So 4, and then plus or minus 2 root 3. And there is our solution. Last one we have, y squared equals negative 4. So you got to be careful with this. Depending on the level of algebra you're in, you may be able to do this, you may not be able to. But when you have a square here, again, to get rid of it, we take a square root. And again, we do it to both sides. So the square and the square root will cancel out, leaving with y. However, if you've not dealt with complex numbers, you can't do this. You cannot take the square root of a negative number. If you're not dealing with complex numbers, then you say that this has no real solutions, if that's your level. However, if you can deal with complex numbers, what we do is we take the negative out of it and call it I. So we could say plus or minus square root of 4, and then we have to have an I outside of the square root in the back. And then we just take the square root of 4. So y equals plus or minus 2i. So If you can deal with complex answers, this will be your answer. If you can't deal with complex answers, then this will be your answer.